Our second speaker today, Dr. Danny Gibbons. Dr. Danny Gibbons is a native of Greene County, Kentucky, and Greensboro, Kentucky, and I'm proud to say that Danny was one of my advisees as an undergraduate at West Kentucky University, and not just one of them, but one of the most outstanding students I've ever known was Dr. Danny Gibbons. Dr. Danny Gibbons did his DVM at Auburn University, came back to Campbellsville, Kentucky, and practiced with Dr. Ben Cox in Campbellsville, and decided that he really needed a greater challenge. And so he went back to graduate school, did the doctorate, and became a faculty member at Auburn. And anyone who's been a student of Dr. Gibbons at Auburn could tell you quickly how great a student he's been. But if we also look at his research work, we'll learn that he's one of the world gurus in working with respiratory disease in cattle. So we're just honored. Dr. Gibbons, we're honored to have you here today. Really appreciate your being here, and I think you'll learn a lot from Dr. Gibbons today.
Thanks so much, Dr. Jones. With that great introduction, the reality is they needed someone to speak between Dr. Jason Smith and Dr. David Smith. And I'm here to fill that, and I want to do this in a specific and particular way. So the topic I'm going to talk about is vaccination and management to optimize calf health. As we talk about vaccination, we tend to think, okay, there's going to be a shot that we can give to take care of this problem. And when we think of a shot, we think about there's going to be a silver bullet that's going to answer the question. I say that to say, if you don't take the information that Dr. Jason Smith just gave you, in essence, to summarize some of that in a simple way, he just did a great job teaching us when you're going out there in the winter to feed hay and supplement to cows, you're not just feeding the cow, you are feeding that gestating calf. And that gestating calf is being programmed to either expect nutrients and survive or to not expect nutrients and probably die. If you do that nutrition thing wrong, this vaccination stuff that we're going to talk about is meaningless. Dr. David Smith is going to come after me, and he's going to talk about management. And I will tell you straight up, I'm a firm believer that if you do your nutrition optimally, and if you do your management optimally, you can get by with a not so good vaccination program and you'll have a great production system. The other thing I firmly believe as we talk about this, you can have a great vaccination program. Some of you all have worked so diligently with great minds to create a great vaccination program that you have an amazing vaccination program. But your nutrition and your management is such that it's still not working. And if you think that I'm going to come in here in my little segment and help you improve an already outstanding vaccination program so you can feed really poor quality hay and so that you can manage them in knee-deep mud and the vaccine is going to make it all work perfectly, I need to tell you straight up, I'm going to fail if that's what you're expecting. Because you just can't do that. Hopefully, I'm going to give you some thoughts that you'll be able to take home, think about, really implement. As we talk about optimization, the other thing you heard Jason Smith say is you heard him say, optimal is often not maximal. Meaning, you can vaccinate this calf for things that the calf will never see. That's not optimal. That might be the maximum immunization. That might be the maximum protection. But maximum is not optimal. I practiced in Kentucky for a period of time. I have seen that really bizarre case, okay? The really bizarre case that stands out, possibly someone in the room has seen one before, but the cow with rabies, okay? Really unusual to see a cow with rabies. The one that you'll see out of 100,000 ill animals has a really odd bellow to it. The bellow sounds like a scream rather than a cow bellowing. You'll hear it, you'll remember that for as long as you're around cattle, if you ever see a case of rabies in a cow. But the last thing you need to do is vaccinate your cattle for rabies. That's just not a good use of your time, resources, energy. As we talk about this, I've got 4 foundational points. The first foundational point is I need for you to think about what is your goal. If you need a picture in your mind, it's basketball season. Yes, I'm coming from Auburn University right now. We were undefeated until last night. We played Alabama. What a deal to lose to Alabama in basketball. But I say all of that because I want you to picture a basketball goal. What's the goal? The goal of vaccination is immunization. If you don't achieve the goal, you haven't done any good. To immunize that animal, let's use this analogy. If the goal is transportation, your vehicle creates that transportation. But your vehicle has to have fuel to put in it. If you put fuel into a broken down vehicle, you're not going anywhere, right? If you got gas but you don't have a vehicle to put it in, you're not going anywhere. It takes both of those to get transportation. In the same way, if our goal is immunization, our goal is protection from things that make calves sick, we have to have an immunocompetent calf if we're going to vaccinate that calf. And we have to have an effective vaccine. A lot of effective vaccines out there, but you need to understand if you're going to vaccinate a calf that is already in a negative energy balance, that calf is not getting the nutrients that it needs. It's having trouble with thermoregulation. And you're going to vaccinate it to make it better? That's not going to work. Responding to vaccination takes energy. Responding to vaccines takes stress, because in the same way that you can put great fuel in your truck, but it's going to take some stress on the vehicle to create transportation. If you've got a calf at the tipping point, the calf is stressed, you can give that calf a very effective vaccine, and the vaccine itself can cause the calf to become ill because it was already so stressed. So you have to think about timing of vaccination. The goal of vaccination is immunization. The goal is not just to give the calf the vaccine and think that the whole thing has worked in that situation. The second picture, first picture is the basketball goal, because I want you to remember the goal of vaccination is immunization. The second picture is the clock. The reason I want you to think about the clock is I want you to remember number 2 point. Immunity is not conferred when you withdraw the needle from the calf. It takes time. You got to realize that. The goal of vaccination is immunization. It takes time to achieve the goal after you administer the vaccine. Let's give you an example so that we can really apply this. And I apologize, it's a little bit small on the slide, but in essence, we've got a producer here in Kentucky. And I'll tell you that this language comes straight from the letter that was written by the lawyer of the vaccine company, okay? Just so you understand the context. The lawyer of the vaccine company is writing the letter describing the operation. This producer, backgrounder, ban castrate 600-pound bull calves and vaccinate with this company's, and the goal is not to talk about this company, but they vaccinate with this company's tetanus toxoid, Clostridium perfringens, so they're trying to prevent tetanus. At the same time that they put a band on these 600-pound calves, they're vaccinating for tetanus. They've been doing this for 3 to 4 years without any problems, but in the last 3 months, they've had 7 dead calves, 7 to 12 days after vaccination and banding. The attending veterinarian has diagnosed tetanus. The producer has contacted the vaccine company. What does the vaccine company say? The protocol on the given farm has been the same for 3 or 4 years, tetanus toxoid at banding of those 600-pound calves, without any history of tetanus. In the vaccine company's opinion, the reason those calves have not had tetanus in the previous 7 years is not because the vaccine worked, but because there was no real challenge. So be careful. If you're thinking, my vaccine protocol works because I haven't had any disease, you might not have had any disease because you don't have any challenge. You don't have that particular agent causing disease on your farm, so you just think your vaccine works. In this particular situation, you'll see in blue they say, it is a fact that these calves will not have adequate protective immunity 7 to 10 days after initial vaccination. That's the letter coming from the vaccine company. If you're vaccinating for tetanus and thinking that you have protection 7 to 10 days later, you do not. It's going to take you 21 days to reach that level of immunity that you're going to feel comfortable with. The vaccine company says it this way: I feel that this case is a simple matter of basic immunology logic and can be corrected by simply changing the timing of vaccination or switching to a tetanus antitoxin. That's an antibody. Now, I'm not here to talk to you to say all of you need to worry about tetanus. Young calves are not very susceptible to tetanus. If you do a knife castration, I'm not real worried about tetanus. If you're band castrating 600-pound calves, you got to be concerned about tetanus. And if you're doing that, you need to realize you can't put the band on at the same time that you give the tetanus vaccination and think that you're protecting against tetanus. You can do that for 3 or 4 years and not have any calves die of tetanus, but it was not because your vaccination achieved immunization to protect that calf. It takes time to achieve the goal of immunization. So the question is, how long does it take? I realize too many words on the slide, but I want to give you a couple of ground rules. With a killed product, you really need a booster. Now, just so we're all on the same page, killed product, how do I know if a vaccine is a killed vaccine? The easiest rule of thumb is if all of it comes in one bottle, okay? If it's one liquid bottle and that is the vaccine, that's a killed product. It's going to take at least 21 days for that killed product to stimulate protection. And almost all killed vaccines need a booster to truly stimulate immunity. Says so on the label. Don't have to trust me on that. Feel free to read it off the label. If you're going to rely on a killed product, a lot of times the label's going to tell you it requires a booster. Modified live products are a little different. They stimulate immunity faster because they are a live product. So the data says that somewhere between 3 and 5 days, you're going to stimulate protective immunity against respiratory disease in these calves. That's great. But you need to know the vaccine creates stress in and of itself with the modified live. So yes, we can get quicker protection. 5 days, certainly we're going to get protection using the modified lives. If we're using a killed, it's going to take us 21 days, and we often need a booster to stimulate that immunity. When we think about our industry, by and large, I'm talking to you all as cow-calf producers. Some of you do some backgrounding of calves. I get that. At the cow-calf level, that's where we truly need to be stimulating immunity. The vaccine creates stress. That calf has less stress on the cow-calf operation than once they enter the other industry segments. That's a great time to create immunity. And at the same time, I know the system, if you are selling your calves in such a way that the calf loses its identity, meaning the farm source, the way that calf has been treated previously does not impact the sale price. Let's just be very frank, because it takes energy to create immunization. You're losing pounds of calf at the time that you sell them if you vaccinate them 15, 21 days right before you sell them and they lose their identity. We have to understand the bigger picture. We have to understand the need to keep calves healthy all the way through the program, and we as cow-calf producers have to try to find some system so that we can receive the financial reward for that. And I realize that's easier to talk about than it is to do. A really interesting study here on saying if you vaccinate before weaning, 15 days before weaning, at weaning, or if you wait and delay that situation, what happens? Well, what we see clearly from a nice study that was performed here is they tend to lose weight right after you vaccinate them because they're responding to that to create immunity. But then, once they have created immunity, they have a more rapid weight gain following that. It's so interesting to me. For individuals in the room that might have retained ownership on a group of calves, it is a no-brainer that you're going to vaccinate them well. That will pay off every single time. If you're going to own that calf through the feeding process, you will find that your vaccine pays for itself over and over and over again. And yet we've got some folks in the room who've been frustrated before because they vaccinated a calf 21 days before they took it to the stockyards, and they didn't see a greater price increase because the calf was sold in a manner that it lost its identity to what had been done on the farm. And that calf that got vaccinated 21 days before you sold it with no identity, no relationship with the buyer, you don't receive a financial benefit for that. The calf is healthier. That calf is more likely to survive through the whole process. But you've got to look at the situations. You've got to think about what you're doing. How can you have an overall management program that not only creates immunity but benefits that farm in that specific situation? So the goal of vaccination is immunization. Immunity is not conferred upon withdrawal of the needle. Third point, it's almost like a teeter-totter situation. Vaccination, the selection of vaccines, is a balancing act between two things. It's so interesting to think about all the things you learned about on the playground as a kid. You learned that you could have the most fun on a teeter-totter if you were on there with a kid about your same size, right? Because if you get on a teeter-totter with a kid who's a lot bigger than you, it's tough. You end up sitting up here until that kid gets tired, and then he walks off to go play with somebody else, and you hit the ground really hard, right? You all remember those days on the playground. This balancing act between safety of the vaccine and efficacy of the vaccine is something we really do have to consider. We can talk about BVD. I had a privilege to interact with you all in 2018. We talked a lot on BVD. But BVD, the most important thing we can do for BVD is to protect the developing fetus from becoming infected. Because if a developing calf in the uterus becomes infected before 125 days of gestation, that calf is going to be persistently infected as long as it lives, and it's going to cause problems. So if we can prevent the persistent infection that results in infection of a fetus, from infection of a fetus, we can do what we need to do. So as we think about that, a lot of different label claims are out there. And in essence, you can boil it down to the toughest thing to do when it comes to immunization against this specific virus. The toughest thing to do is to prevent fetal infection. It's a lot easier to prevent respiratory disease than it is to prevent fetal infection. So we know very clearly, and again, a lot of data on charts, but just to show you, there are two types of vaccines for BVD. There's the killed products and there's the modified live products. If we want fetal protection, we need the modified live products. That's very clear when you study the labeling, when you study the products, when you study the prior research. And if you're giving killed, just so we're on the same page, the thing that I need to make sure I do a good job communicating won't work because I've been yelled at by a producer who had this misunderstanding before, and I don't want to be yelled at by you. If you've got a cow and she's gotten one dose of a killed product every year as long as she's been on the farm. Okay? We heard a question earlier about cows that were 14 and 15 years of age. Wow, 14 and 15. If that 14-year-old cow got a dose of killed BVD vaccine every year for 14 years, after 14 years, if she comes into contact with a persistently infected animal and she's pregnant, that calf's going to become infected. One dose of killed product every year. That's 14 years worth of vaccination. And yet, if she's exposed, she's going to produce an infected calf. That must mean the vaccines don't work. No, that's not what I'm saying. The vaccine protocols were never followed with that cow. The vaccine product, if you're using a killed product, the killed product says you have to get 2 doses in within 3 to 5 weeks. If you never do that and you give 1 dose of killed product every year for all those years, you don't have protection. Modified live product, if you'll get a dose of modified live product for BVD into that animal before breeding, yes, you can then booster that with a killed product later on. The research and data supports that. So the annual booster with a killed product after they got a modified live as a heifer, you can do that. That'll work. But do please understand, 1 dose of a killed product every year for whatever number of years you want to do it, if that's all she gets, she's not going to be protected against BVD. And when we talk about protecting her, we're really talking about protecting the calf inside her. That persistently infected calf is not just going to cause problems for itself, but in a bad year of poor nutrition, high environmental stress, that persistently infected calf is going to infect all the other calves around us, and it's going to cause problems. So when we're talking about vaccinating cows here, we're talking about preventing persistently infected animals so that we can have healthy calf crops and not be dealing with these virus shedders. Killed products. Over on this far end of the slide, closer to safety. Modified live products, great for efficacy. Killed products, they don't produce a virus in the bloodstream of that animal. They don't grow within the animal. Modified live products need to create a mild immunizing infection. They need to create virus in the bloodstream of the animal. When you mix up that vaccine, the lyophilized freeze-dried powder with the liquid, inject that mixture into the animal, that was live virus in that refrigerated freeze-dried pellet. You mixed it with the fluid. You inject it into the animal. That virus needs to replicate in the animal to cause a mild immunizing infection. That's not what we want to do in stressed pregnant cows. Because that we know very clearly. If you take a naive cow, never seen infectious bovine rhinotracheitis, IBR, before in her life, you take that naive cow, you give that naive cow a modified live IBR vaccine while she's pregnant. The study's been done. You will cause 55% of those animals to abort. She was totally naive to IBR. You gave her a modified live when she was pregnant. You will cause 55% to abort. Now, I know some of y'all are sitting in the room and say, well, Doc, that guy's bald and it comes from a long way off. He wears a tie, but he doesn't know what he's talking about, because I've given modified live to a pregnant cow before that I don't think she ever had a vaccine and she didn't abort. If that cow went through several stock sales and was infected with live IBR virus somewhere along the way, she was immunized by going through all those different situations. Those cows that have run into IBR at the stockyards, they do not abort when you give them a modified live IBR vaccine, because they're immunized based on real-world experience with IBR. But if you got a naive cow, she's never been off the farm, she's never been vaccinated for IBR, you give her a modified live while she's pregnant, 55% of the time she will abort. So we've got to think about, should we use a killed product here? Should we use a modified live product? You've got to think about, how are you going to protect that calf? And by protecting that calf, protect the resulting calf crop. A busy slide. This slide's interesting. The open diamonds are the control group. They did not get a modified live vaccine. All of the other groups did get a modified live vaccine. The importance of the chart, let's see if I can show you right here. The importance of the chart is here where you have stars on the chart, you see that there's a significant difference in the white blood cell count in these animals that were vaccinated versus the ones that were not vaccinated. Okay? So on these days, specifically day 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, after the vaccine was administered, if an animal didn't get vaccine, they have more circulating white blood cells than they do if they did get vaccine. And it doesn't matter what vaccine you gave them, if it was modified live. A modified live BVD vaccine will cause a decrease in white blood cell count. The reason I say that is because timing is so critical. With a modified live vaccine, you're going to get really good efficacy. But the question is, when do you want the infection to occur? You want the infection to occur when an animal's not really stressed. So pick a time when they're not really going to be stressed. Vaccinate them then, let them have a slight decrease in the white blood cell count on days 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 following the vaccine, and know that they're going to be well protected after that. Don't give the modified live vaccine the day before you're going to stress them out totally. Now, I understand some of y'all are sitting in the audience saying, that guy's from the ivory tower. He doesn't understand. The only time we have a cattle up is when we're about to really stress them. So we're going to vaccinate them when we really stress them. Just understand the balancing act that you're working with. So as we look at this, the last point, and this last point ties in both with what Dr. Jason Smith talked about and what Dr. David Smith is going to talk about. And it says that the health or disease of this calf results from a reckoning of characteristics associated with three things. The calf, which we can call the host in this situation. If that calf is, and we're not going to talk about it here, but there's some really neat work being done that says you can genetically select cattle for resistance to disease. You can genetically select some cattle that are less likely to become sick. The genetics of that calf and the attributes surrounding it is one of three factors. Second factor is the environment. The environment of that calf. How much mud there is, what the temperature is, what the rainfall is. Jason Smith's picture of the cow with snow all over because she was wet in the snowstorm, trying to, not just regulate nutrition on that animal, but regulate the health of that animal. The third of these three factors has to do with what we call the agent. So if we're talking about a virus or bacteria, it's so interesting. Science loves to talk to you about antibiotic resistance bacteria. And science loves to talk to you about this virus that has these neat characteristics. I'm a virologist. I think BVD virus is so cool. We know exactly how many nucleotides make up that virus. We know that certain changes in certain nucleotides of the virus can cause totally different impact of the virus on animals. You need to understand that of these three things, the thing that will always create a situation where the least changes will have the biggest impact is the environment. Every time. We can talk about superbugs. Superbugs are unlikely to cause disease if we have a really good environment. You think about that calf's environment. Dave Smith is going to be coming behind me. He's going to be giving you some specific tips and tools on how you and your operation can create a better environment for that calf to be born in. Vaccines are important. They can add to the overall health of the herd. If you don't have the nutrition and you don't have the management to impact the environment, you can still get disease in the face of a really good vaccination protocol. And you can come to me and say, how can I improve my vaccination protocol? And what I really need to talk to you about is the environment that that calf is in. And you really need to talk to somebody who has more nutrition knowledge than I do, like Jason Smith, about making sure that animal has good nutrition, both in utero for programming and also once it hits the ground. So as we talk about these things, don't become so tunnel vision on your vaccine protocol that you forget the things that have the biggest impact on this balance between health and disease. the likelihood that a producer performs a challenge study. This is an interesting question to me. How likely is it that you on your farm produce what we call in the line of work I'm involved in a challenge study? That means you introduce virus onto your farm to see how animals are going to either die or produce fetal infection with BVD. The significant impact occurs when you have commingling, okay? It's so interesting. I talked to a producer just a little earlier this morning, and he was talking about he's managing cattle on 5 different operations, driving from operation to operation, 5 different operations. What often happens in that situation is when you wean the calves, you commingle them all together. Because you own calves on all 5 farms. They just happen to be on those 5 different farms. They were born on that farm, raised on that farm, happy on that farm. It's time to wean them. Let's put them all together. You need to understand what you've just done. You have taken those animals from all the different operations and you have commingled all of the agents that they're infected with, and you've created stress, and they're fighting over who gets bunk space, if they even know how to go to a bunk. Or you've taken them from nursing mom and grazing a little bit to just putting this forage supplement in front of them, and they're not sure what to do. So they're stressed, they're malnourished for a period of time, they're introduced to new organisms. Commingling is when we see problems. You all know the analogy, but it's such an apt analogy. If you all have young kids or grandkids, you know they're going to get sick when they first go to school, right? After the Christmas holidays, when they all go out and then they come back together, they're going to get sick. They're just going to bring it home sick. It's the same commingling experience that we're talking about in these cattle operations. Same exact thing. How likely are you to purchase a persistently infected calf in the United States? We can run the numbers on that. There's a certain calculation that we can do. But understand, bottom line is, if you buy 100 animals, you buy 100 heifers to introduce into an operation, you don't test them for BVD to see if they're persistently infected. Based on the current prevalence in the United States, if you buy 100 heifers not tested for BVD, you've got a 33% chance that you are buying a heifer that is persistently infected. She's going to shed and spread virus, infect all the other animals within a very short period of time after that commingling occurs. The other thing that when we look at virus being transmitted within a group of animals, the rate that the virus reproduces itself. We're not talking about your cattle reproductive rate. Again, I want to hammer it home. Jason Smith did a great job showing you, if you want to have a really poor pregnancy rate, you do a really poor job with nutrition, you can almost guarantee that you're going to have a poor pregnancy rate. Here we're talking about virus reproductive rate, and it has 3 factors. Okay? One is the probability of shedding virus. Persistently infected calves are always shedding virus. Second factor is the frequency of contact with susceptible animals, commingling, whether it's right after Christmas break in your elementary school or if it's in a feedlot right after we've weaned calves from 5 different farms, combining them together. We're going to have some susceptible, naive animals to be infected, and then the duration of the infectious period. The longer an animal is infected and shedding, the greater the reproductive rate of the virus. So as you think about this, I do want to challenge you to think long term. What's best for that calf, and what's best for my operation to be able to have a sustainable operation to receive the economic benefits of the immunity that we're protecting at this cow-calf level. So hopefully that gives you 4 clear pictures. 1, the basketball goal. 2, the clock. 3, the teeter-totter, this balancing act between safety and efficacy. And finally, this triangle, this balance between the calf, the environment, and the pathogen, so that you can see that whole situation. So hopefully that's helpful to you. I'm glad to answer questions here if we have time.
Has there been studies done with using modified lives like Inforce 3 in your calves or your replacement heifers before they go into being in their cow rotation, that you have protection for BVD then?
So questions I understand, are there studies looking at those modified live vaccines given to heifers before they go into that cow population to see if you get protection. Understand two things there. One is vaccines are all about timing. Those studies have been done, and we know a lot from those studies. Those studies show us oftentimes as a producer, I want to count the vaccine that I gave to that calf when that calf was young as my protective vaccine for the breeding animal. There needs to be caution there because we do know that, and we've done the work at Auburn and other places to show some of those maternal antibodies will last even out to 6 and 7 months of age. And those maternal antibodies can change. They won't totally prevent, but they change the immune response to vaccination. So while a vaccine given to a 4 or 5 or even 6-month-old calf is very good and effective at providing respiratory protection, there is clarity that we need an additional vaccine between weaning and breeding to provide the protection against IBR and BVD for that animal when she enters the cow herd. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Would love to see that animal get a modified live somewhere as a calf. Would love to see that heifer get a modified live as a yearling. And then after that, killed boosters. We got a gold program. Understand the vaccinations that we do on that heifer, the modified lives that we've just talked about, those are critical to success. We can look at that and we'll just show you this chart right here. This is from a NOM study that shows in the United States on heifers, 48.5% of those heifers got modified live, 51% got a killed vaccine. That's wrong if we look at the science. That's the time when those heifers should be getting modified live, and we've got 51% of producers giving those heifers killed vaccines. This is where I think maybe I've done a bad job communicating. The yearling heifer is the least stressed animal on your operation. Yes, she's having to grow, but she needs modified live. Please give her modified live because she's going to be stressed later on and you're providing great protection when you do that. So great question. Again, an emphasis hopefully to communicate that's a great time for modified live. Thank you. Question is, how do you know that animal that we just described is not pregnant? Okay? So, good question. And I like the fact that it's a real world question. Okay? Let's talk about this thing. One, we could have an vet come out and preg check. Understand that we're hoping she didn't get pregnant before you weaned her. You and I both know sometimes that does happen. My point that I'm going to throw in here like a boomerang is, if she is pregnant and you don't want her pregnant, give her the modified live. Maybe that'll cause her to abort, and that'd be a good thing. Is that fair? You see where I'm coming from? Good question.
Is it fair to say it's best to vaccinate calves at least one time while they're still on the cow before weaning? And if that's the case, is there a quantifiable value that you can put on doing that versus waiting until the calves are weaned, whether it be in less shrink, efficacy of their vaccine, or a rate of gain?
Great question. And the question, and I don't want to steal from David Smith, but David Smith is going to talk about a principle here. You're asking me, I'm just going to use the phrase and he's going to explain it better. You're asking me a tactical question, okay? And the tactical answer is it's going to vary between farms. It's going to vary when you're selling that animal. It's going to vary with a lot of different factors. We know if you can vaccinate that animal before you wean it, you're going to stimulate really good immunity. You're going to get it weaned. It's then going to be stressed. You might need to give it a booster at some point. Would encourage you to do so. But then that animal's going to go forward. But you and I both know there's stress on your operation, on your equipment, on your time of trying to get those calves up and vaccinate them before you ever wean them. So a lot of operators are going to say, it's not worth it. It's not worth the stress of everything. When we look at the definition of optimal, not maximal, we know that maximal immunization is get them up, vaccinate them before you ever wean them, get them up again once you've weaned them. That's maximal. That's a really, really good program, but that may not be optimal for your specific operation. I don't have specific numbers from specific studies to answer your questions, and I would argue that if I did, those numbers from that operation would not mirror what you're going to get on your operation because it's a tactical decision. Great question.
I work my cattle twice a year. Work them in the springtime, and then I work them in the fall. If I use the live virus in the springtime, how much protection does the kill virus if I use kill in the fall for the pregnant ones? How much protection would that give them?
So questions, I understand it. Going to work cattle twice a year, giving a modified live in the spring and a killed in the fall. How much protection will I get? Help me with this just so I understand your operation. Your heifers, did they get a modified live when they were heifers?
I have not, but I'm going to switch over to modified.
Good. Always use kill virus with a booster. And the kill virus with a booster will provide a degree of protection. That degree was clearly identified in a study by Dan Grooms when he was at Michigan State. And he showed, working with the Zoetis product, a fine product, killed product, you got 73% fetal protection from BVD. So I do want to encourage you to switch over to that modified live product. The challenge becomes in how to do that. Because if you can, in essence, find the time when you've got the fewest number of cows pregnant, that's the time to come in with that modified live. If you can give that modified live, understand that for a given animal, and you and I both know you're having to work this group as a herd, which means you got animals at different spots in the whole thing. But if you can get a modified live into them when they're pregnant, when they're not pregnant, then you can come back and give killed once a year at least and do great. If you had a program where you're given a modified live in the spring and a killed in the fall, there's no question that you're going to have great protection with that. You've just got to transition that herd and get them there. If you give the modified live, every time after that, when you give a killed, you no longer need to give 2 doses because you're priming immunity that has already been produced by the modified live. So once you get a modified live in, when we talk about boosting the modified live with a killed product, you only need 1 dose there, not 2.
Great question. We're going to take one more, then we'll move to the next speaker.
Sorry about all these questions. But has anybody tested to see if a baby calf gets any immunity from blackleg vaccine if it's immunized at birth?
Great question. Question is, does a calf get any protection from blackleg if they're immunized at birth? Understand that the clostridial product is very immunogenic. The answer to your specific question has to do with whether or not that cow produced really good colostral protection against that clostridial agent. In essence, if you take a calf from a cow who she didn't have great protection, that calf is going to respond well to that vaccine to stimulate protection. If the calf was already protected because it got good colostral antibodies from mom, that additional blackleg vaccine may not create the great positive impact that we would think. But certainly once that calf gets to be, and you can argue about exactly what the number is, 3.5, 4 months of age, that 1 dose of blackleg will stimulate good protection.
Dr. Gibbons, hang on just a second. Let's give Dr. Gibbons a big hand here to start with for doing a wonderful job. Dr. Gibbons, hang on up here just a moment. In Kentucky, we're very indebted to Dr. Danny Gibbons for his work at Auburn University as a professor there, but the way he's worked with us in Kentucky with our veterinary program. For those of you not aware, we have the best and cheapest veterinary education in the country here in the state of Kentucky. Dr. Gibbons has been a stalwart in helping us to continue to have that kind of relationship with Auburn. So, Dr. Gibbons, we're very appreciative to you for what you've done directly for the cattle industry in the state of Kentucky by helping us to have veterinarians in this state who are large animal practitioners and taking care of our cattle. We're going to present Dr. Gibbons a plaque for appreciation. I will add that Dr. Gibbons is leaving Auburn University to become dean of the Virginia Maryland Veterinary School at Virginia Polytechnic Institute, probably in about April. And we appreciate all you've done for us in Kentucky. Dave Maples and Tim White are going to present Dr. Gibbons with a plaque. Once again, another hand, please.